It was Shakespeare who wrote, "How like a serpent's tooth is a thankless child. Indeed, ingratitude cuts like a knife." Our forefathers knew who had brought them across the sea to a new homeland, and they knew to whom they owed thanks. In a more godly era, Thanksgiving was made a federal holiday. So, are we truly thankful? Today, the story of one among 10 men who gave God thanks. Stay with us. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Today, Erwin Lutzer brings a Thanksgiving message on one man's gratitude, a man who should be a model for all of us. Join us now as we hear Just One in a Crowd.
You know, there are many different ways that we have to distinguish between people. Oftentimes we distinguish them because of their appearance. I suppose that's most common. Sometimes we do it because of their intelligence or their abilities or the color of their skin. But today we're going to learn a different way that you can have someone distinguished from another, someone who will actually stand out in a crowd. The story is found in the 17th chapter of Luke's Gospel, Luke chapter 17. It's one that perhaps you're familiar with, but I shall read it to you. It's very brief, the 17th chapter of Luke, and I'm beginning at verse 11. If you'd follow along, please. On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee, and as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And he said to him, "Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well." Leprosy. Leprosy drew these 10 men together because in those days, if you were leprous, you were looking for a colony, a gang of men who would walk around together and take care of themselves as best they could. Among them was a man who was a Samaritan. Now, the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans, but it's interesting that when you are in a time of need, when things are desperate, you don't care who's next to you if you're helping one another in times of distress. So you have 10 men here, and according to the Old Testament, if you read the 13th chapter of Leviticus, those who had leprosy were supposed to have torn clothes, unkempt hair. They were to wander around outside the camp, and when anyone came near to them within, say, 150 feet, they were to shout, "Unclean, unclean, unclean, stay away." Imagine that kind of life. Now, in the Bible, leprosy is compared to sin. As a matter of fact, one of the lessons that God wanted to get across in the Old Testament times, as well as the New, is the likeness of leprosy to sin. Because what leprosy does to your body is precisely, almost precisely, what sin does to your soul. So, as we look at these men, let us notice 4 similarities and 1 difference. The first similarity is this, that they had the same disease. They had leprosy. Now, what is leprosy? Because it's almost non-existent today in most countries, we aren't acquainted with it. But leprosy was not, as some people think, it was not the rotting infections that people think it is. It was something more sinister, and that is, it actually shut down the nervous system that communicates to you that you are in pain. It anesthetizes you. As a result, people in primitive countries would sometimes take a potato out of the fire. Their hands would be greatly burned, but they wouldn't know it because they couldn't feel it. They could put their hand in boiling water and they wouldn't know it. One of the reasons why lepers used to lose their toes is that while they slept, rodents would sometimes come and nibble on those toes and eat those toes, and they wouldn't even know it because they couldn't feel it. Dr. Paul Brand, who worked with lepers, said that he frequently would simply send a cat home with some of the people so that the cat could catch these rodents, and that in itself would help some in terms of what lepers were going through. It is, said Dr. Paul Brand, a painless hell. You're in no pain, but as you look around, you notice that instead of fingers, you now just have stubs. Your toes begin to deteriorate. You begin to walk with a limp, and then your back would soon be bent. And you'd manage as best you could with your sunken eyes. What a terrible disease, with sores that were open and putrid. And so the Bible says, remember now, that there is a similarity. Think for a moment about sin. What does sin do? When you feel guilty, you do one of two things. Either A, you look for forgiveness to take away your sin. That's the first thing you do. If not, what do? You harden your heart. Tell yourself you don't need forgiveness. And the harder your heart comes, you have no idea what's going on, and your soul is anesthetized. Your soul is numb, and it can feel no pain. Have you ever talked to somebody like that? You remind them that they are sinners, and they look around and they say to themselves, me, I don't see anything wrong with me. I'm perfectly fine the way I am. That's what sin does. It takes away any feeling of guilt, any feeling of honesty as to who you are, and you can live in your own little private world. So the leper lived in despair. He also lived with rejection. You'll notice that when they come to Jesus, it said they stood at a distance. They wanted to maintain that 150 feet between themselves and Christ, as they were trained to do. And so they were rejected from their homes. They were rejected by the family.